Welcome to the Psychedelic Couch. Before we dive into today's discussion, we remind our listeners that using illicit drugs carries significant risks and legal consequences. Psychedelic substances like LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA and DMT are illegal in many countries, including the UK, and their possession or use can lead to legal penalties. Psychedelics can have profound effects on mental and physical health. While some report positive experiences, others may face negative effects like anxiety and psychosis. These substances can also interact unpredictably with medications and underlying conditions. Approach psychedelics with caution and responsibility. This podcast shares information, not encouragement or advocacy for illegal use. If you or someone you know struggles with substance abuse, seek help from healthcare professionals or local support services. In this episode of the Psychedelic Couch, I have the pleasure of meeting Melissa Barker, who shares her story of healing sexual trauma through the use of psychedelics. She recounts the challenges of integrating these profound insights and the complexities of navigating the psychedelic space, including the potential risks of working with less ethical practitioners. Melissa's story underscores the necessity of finding trustworthy guides and the transformative potential of psychedelics when used responsibly with the proper support. Overall, this episode offers a compelling narrative of resilience, healing, and the profound impact of psychedelics in trauma therapy, providing valuable insights for listeners interested in the therapeutic potential of these substances. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon and this morning where you are. This is a really important topic. You know, we're going to start looking at sexual trauma, and as a sex therapist who specialises in trauma, no better person to speak to than you. And I would really, if you're willing, I think it would be really valuable for you to share a bit about your story, if Sure. that would be okay. And, you know, you're, as a survivor of sexual trauma, where did you start on your journey to healing?
Great question.
What's worked and what's not worked?
Totally. Yes, exactly. What's in my toolbox? Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for the work you're doing. It is so important and so needed. And I think, as you said, this is a shadow piece of the conversation we need to be having, you know? So I like to say that I'm, you know, a statistic. I started with childhood trauma, layered into an assault when I was 17. And then that really set me up for my 20s and early 30s, just being a lot of trauma because it's what was normal, you know, like relationships I sought out had a lot of domestic violence in them or sexual trauma. And I had so much trauma in my life that the waters I was swimming in, that just felt normal. You know, I knew something was off. I knew this wasn't right. I knew it felt awful, but it just kept happening. And so it really reinforced this narrative of like, I guess I'm just a survivor and I just have to keep surviving. And then I did a lot of work. I found my therapist in my late 20s, started doing EMDR, started really learning EFT, more breath work, found Kundalini, yoga, and just started like, you know, healing in these other ways and really breaking down the trauma, and was diagnosed with PTSD, which later became CPTSD just because of all of the compounded trauma that I've been through. And in my mid 30s, kind of felt like I got a handle on it. I was in my doctorate, I was working, I felt like I was in this place of kind of alchemizing my trauma. My startup at the time was a community first approach for trauma survivors. So we had a community built for trauma survivors by trauma survivors. And it was this really unique marketplace. And then I turned 40. And I was at my first South by Southwest, and on paper, it looked like everything was going right. I was presenting at my first South by Southwest. I was in all these amazing meetings with these visionaries and technology leaders. My startup had just raised money, and I was gifted a massage in Austin, Texas by a business advisor. And in that massage, I was sexually assaulted. And that assault just rippled through me. I mean, it was, I have theories, right?
Yeah.
But my nervous system was relaxed. I wasn't in a dissociative place. I didn't even dissociate. You know, the way the sexual assault happened, it was so jarring to my system. And then after, I was taken into a 90-minute facial where my brain felt like it just exploded. So I got out of that, called my partner, and said, this just happened and I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I can't even move. And I still had like a day and a half, I think, in Texas. And so I kind of just went into this like survival mode, like get me out of Texas, let me get home. I got home, immediately got into therapy. But I remember in that therapy session, I was so broken. My partner had to physically hold me so I could even do therapy. Like, it was, it's Zoom time still. So it was on Zoom, but he had to literally hold me because I was shaking. Like, everything was blown out. And I had like the worst, almost like PTSD, CPTSD flashback. And that's when things got really, really serious. I started to realize like none of my tools are working. I don't want to do EMDR, it's too fresh. I am not sleeping. I'm irritable, all the things are happening and nothing that I have in my tool belt, breath work, going in the sauna, all the different things that I've acquired, none of them were working. And so I was at a really low point where I was like, is this the time that I have to try like an SSRI? But I knew it probably wouldn't be the right answer. I knew this was like depression. I knew it was trauma. And so I found ketamine actually. And I started doing low dose ketamine at home through Mind Bloom. And little by little, that started helping me kind of like get my nervous system back online. And I was able to start working this trauma. But it took me on a path of using psychedelics. And that's honestly what's changed everything for me.
Amazing. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm curious about the theories you mentioned. I've got some theories about this. I'm like, tell me, tell us more about that.
Yes, yes. So, I've thought about like when I was 5 and I was molested, right? I was 5. I was a little kid. Like the repression I was able to do, because that assault didn't show itself to me until I was 17 and I was assaulted. And even when I was assaulted when I was 17, I was drugged. So like there were all these kind of almost like dissociative pieces built into my other assaults. I think even when abuse was happening in relationships, there'd be a point where I would just disassociate, so the abuse was happening, but I wasn't really there. I wasn't fully online. With this assault, because I was in a massage, I'm in this beautiful spa. It's women owned. This was not a cheap massage either, And I was in this, there were a few elements. I was in this almost like water thing where they like, my arms were kind of like bound, so I couldn't move. So I think that was a component, of the shock. But really, because I was so relaxed, this was at the end of this 90-minute massage, right? I was really relaxed. I was really in my body. And so my theory is, one of my working theories is just my nervous system got just fried, essentially. Like there was no disassociation. There was no protective piece that came online to be like, this is happening and we're going to take care, it was, everything was exposed, like all of me was exposed essentially. And then to go right into the facial, which again is supposed to have, like it's relaxing, you're doing the things, my brain, I equated to like a bomb going off, and I was running it through my head over and over and over and over and over and being like, did that happen? Did that just happen? Did like what, but I froze also, so that's the part that did come online. I just froze, there wasn't this, let me get up and go say this happened. I just completely kind of shut down with my brain rapidly running. And I think that combination, with the body work, if this makes sense, was almost worse because it rippled through me. And I had, I've been through hard times. I've had hard therapy sessions. I've had really hard EMDR sessions. I had never been in a place where like I had to be held to even get into therapy. It just felt like I shattered. And then to have another piece, which was none of my tools were working. So everything that I had acquired and gotten a doctorate in and built a startup on, all the things, nothing was working. But that's when turning to psychedelics, going on this pathless path of medicine work shifted everything, because I was suddenly, like using things that I had never intentionally used really before. I'd used psychedelics when I was younger, but I had never intentionally used them. And I was using things in this new intentional way. And I was able to actually really work the trauma. Like I was able to be like, oh, my body wasn't able to disassociate, and find grace for myself and find compassion.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly humbling, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, hearing you as you were talking about the massage, I was thinking about the protector parts being offline and you're
Yes, exactly.
completely vulnerable
Completely
in
vulnerable.
that position and then being in the freeze response and having that facial. I mean, how did you move? I'm thinking about then the psychedelic experience where it takes so much trust of whoever it is facilitating,
Mhm.
the bravery for you to then sit in that space, having had that experience. How did you find safety? How did you find the person to work with? How did that journey go?
Yeah. So that's really, really, that's actually a great story. So thank you for asking that. So the start was mind bloom at home. So I chose to journey alone.
Mm.
That should tell you right there, I already had the barriers up. The protector parts were on. They were like, no, if we're going to do this, we're doing this at home. And so my partner would sit for me. I would go in and journey. And then as that started to get bigger, which I think tends to happen in the psychedelic space, you start to hear like, maybe I need to try something else, or maybe, something, there's a different medicine. And so I started to get curious. And I'm very lucky to live in the Bay Area. We have some of the most amazing underground, people working in the space. And so I was able to just kind of go into my community and say, I want to do a journey. I want to do a bigger journey. And I had decided I wanted to do an MDMA journey.
Mm.
With all the research on PTSD and everything, I was like, that's the one to do. And I was able to find a guide locally in Oakland that we just immediately connected. I felt incredibly safe. She has this amazing grounding energy.
Yeah.
And we were able to just get in there. And I just said, look, this is the latest assault. At 40, I didn't think I was going to be working this, but here I am. And at the same time, while I'm in this assault, right, like going through all that and the healing, I'm advocating for myself because they were not, jumping to take care of things.
Yeah.
And there's like a mother wound that ended up actually happening because the owner really won my trust and was like, I want to help you heal. Give me all your bills. I'll take care of this. I'm so sorry. And then at the end, kind of pulled the rug out and I had to, hire lawyers. I had to go with a lawsuit. So all of that was happening while I was building with this guide, and building trust. And I think because those things we were able to bring those all to the table, I deeply trusted her.
Mm.
And I knew, I need to go in deep. And that MDMA journey was massive. That was in December of 2022. It was massive. But in that journey, I was able to release some huge traumas my body had been holding. So sometimes, when I look back and I think, okay, why did this assault happen? There also feels like there's an initiation here. Like my body was able to go into deeper healing and access deeper parts, which of course gets really scary, but it's needed, right? When we're repressing parts, we need them to come forward. We need them to show us the parts. And again, I had a guide that was amazing and held all this. It was so beautiful. But it was a big deal. It was a really big deal to decide to journey with somebody.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. I can imagine you taking that risk after the context of what had happened in an expanded state is such a leap of faith.
Such a leap of faith. And I have unfortunately had, on the flip side, I've worked with other healers that have had me in those expanded spaces and actually taken full advantage. So that was another, so while I had this beautiful experience with this guide, so much amazing work was done, it really opened me to deeper trust, right? And so I thought, okay, I'm ready to go deeper. I'm ready to do more. And I had a colleague that had a healer in her space that said, she wants to work with you. Because I was going back to Austin, by the way. So a year later, I'm going back to South by Southwest. So this was like a year later. It's the first time back. So many, you can imagine, triggers, right?
Yeah.
And I was telling a friend or a colleague, hey, this is going on and I'm having a hard time. We were in like this medicine women circle. And I was saying, this is really hard. My body's having a hard time. I'm trying to prepare myself. And so she told me, oh, I have a channel that you could work with. And I was first very skeptical. I'm like, a channel? Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, no, she's like an incredible healer. She's a guide. Like she actually lives in Austin. She'd be great for you, and she wants to meet you. She wants to talk to you. And at first I kind of like blew it off. I didn't think anything of it. And then my partner at the time, excuse me, we broke up. And so that like that coupled with going back to Austin was like a big enough like shock again to the system.
Mm.
And so I reached out to this woman and immediately gave her all my trust. I felt like I was finding someone that could save me, someone that could guide me through this, someone that could help me make sense. I thought, okay, this is, this spiritual person. She's in the medicine space. I'm safe. And I was not. She completely used a bunch of abuse tactics to groom me, to keep me in a space of fight or flight, to dysregulate me. And basically just my brain, because I was in these expansive states, was so brainwashed. I had to really, when I finally got out of all this, I had to really ask myself, what's real? But again, like when I look at my story of trauma, and I'm sure you've seen this with patients, like when there's so much trauma in the narrative, it's really hard for a trauma survivor sometimes to be like, is this normal? Is this person safe? Like the assessment. And then that leads to the not, trusting yourself. And then you layer the psychedelics, you're already so open and so expansive. It can be a perfect storm. And this is really what I'm trying to push conversations on, is like, we need to talk about the dark side too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what advice then do you give trauma survivors in terms of using psychedelics in their integration of these experiences? How can they navigate it? Like, what is the safe way to do this?
Yeah, exactly. I know it feels like very doom and gloom right now. I think psychedelics are amazing. I've seen incredible healing. I would say deeply, deeply vetted practitioners and healers and guides, deeply, deeply vetted. There still is stuff happening though. Assaults are still happening, inappropriate touch, there's a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Ma'at. They're doing a lot to work with survivors, and they're actually calling out, different medicine practitioners that have caused harm and saying, we need to talk about this. We need to take the shadow out. So, tracking those bodies of work. I think also for survivors, something I've really been learning the hard way is low and slow tends to be better. Low and slow. Like I work on Sunny Strasberg as a dear friend. We just were on this panel together in Austin, and she does, incredible work with IFS, right? And so Sunny and I were talking, and she's like, I get the protectors buy-in. I get their permission, and I work for a long time with the protectors before we even journey. And then, a low and slow journey. Don't blow your nervous system out. Don't shock your system so big. And I'm all for, I understand also the power of like a macro journey and like being in those bigger, expansive spaces. But if you're brand new to psychedelics, I feel like low and slow, you start to find the medicine, you start to find your edges, you feel your parts online, you start to have conversations with them. The protectors are going to be there. I mean, it was just until, so I did this training in Topanga, and at the start of the training, I've done ketamine plenty of times. We did oral ketamine. And when I started to drop in, I felt my protectors like holding, because I was in a group setting. I had a sitter that I never sat with. My protectors were all online. And I was able to actually, before the journey started, as the journey was, coming on, talk to them and say, I need this and I want this and I'm safe. And like feel them slowly release their grip. But doing that, before with more prep. And then again, finding the medicine that works, but starting low and slow, you can always add more, like
Exactly.
Always can add more. It's not like you're stuck with like, oh, this, you can always layer, but really getting into conversation with those parts and saying, do you trust me to do this? Because when I did that MDMA journey, while it was amazing and incredible, it was MDMA with an MDA booster, and it was very big. It was huge. So on the back end, because I didn't have my protector's permission, I rebounded really badly. Like it was the hardest integration. All the protector parts came online, and they were like, no. This is too much. And, firefighters, the whole thing, like we can't be here. You've said too much. You've let out, our deepest shame. And I think, if I had done it slower and again, worked with those protectors and really gotten their permission, I would have had a better experience on the back end.
Yeah, totally. And just to explain to people that don't know about IFS, this idea that we have protective parts that step in to look after us, that have often been there since we were young kids, and they protect the system. They protect that child part of us. So if we go in too quickly, then they're going to panic.
Oh
As you
yeah.
say, the firefighters come in and we have to get them on side, those parts of us, just gently and with sort of love and kindness for them to know that they're safe so that they can step back and trust in the process. So as you say, whilst those macro experiences can be hugely healing and transformative, they can also really shake the system so much that we can't quite integrate.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what happened, in that journey. I had essentially like an exile come
Mm,
forward
mm,
and share, when I was 21, I had my daughter, and I realized she was a product of assault. And I had just for 19 plus years kept that in me. And so this exile and the journey really came forward and was like, this is a part of your story, and you've been ignoring me, and you haven't been, open to this. And it was so beautiful. Again, I'm on the medicine, I'm able to assess it, I'm able to be in it, I'm able to, feel like I'm healing it. But when that journey ended and the protector parts came back online, it was like it was all systems go. Like they were completely freaked out. They were, again, 19 years of holding something like that in to suddenly come through, and they were scared. And so I had to do a ton of integration work, a ton of really, really, really like white knuckling hard integration work to get those parts settled again, to get them to kind of, work with me. Ketamine, actually doing low dose ketamine, like microdosing ketamine on some of those, like after that journey, really helped me kind of unwind and get into those protector parts and talk to them and have a conversation and say, yeah, I know the exile really, really like let everything happen. It told us everything, but like, please work with me. And so I was able to, find healing in that too. But I always think, I'm a trauma survivor that has a doctorate in trauma healing. Like, I'm not your normal everyday, you know what I mean? Like, how do we make this accessible to people that don't have these tools, don't have these resources, don't have even the understanding of what's kind of happening? Because I
mm,
think you could go into shame after something like that too.
absolutely.
As we know, healing is anything but linear.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking you from a mechanism of action standpoint, for you personally, what do you think that the psychedelics added that you couldn't get from what you were getting from somatic therapy or EMDR? And you said it just stopped working. Like, what was it that did for you?
That's a great question. I think being in the expansive, consciousness shifting space, I was able to really go into to like scary parts of my life. Scary, I when I've done EMDR and I've done other like somatic work, I've always almost like pictured this very haunted house. And I would, be in therapy and be like, oh, there's another room to the house. There's a whole other wing, and there were almost like ghosts in those rooms, right? That I would equate to like the past traumas, the past parts of my story. And really felt like frozen energy, right? And so while I was aware that there were other things, in the house, I had never been brave enough to really go through. And so the psychedelics, I believe, just kind of broke through that veil. They they took me there, and I was able to actually, face it. MDMA especially, you're able to really go into very hard parts of your journey. I remember I was talking to Rick Doblin in Austin, and he was saying, a lot of people think MDMA is like, it's not this euphoric, beautiful experience. Like people that have had a lot of trauma, it's awful. It's like hell. You're going into like the underworld essentially, and like really working these hard pieces. But obviously you're in a more expansive open space that you can go there without shame.
Mm,
I think that's a huge piece too. Shame really got in my way for a lot of it, especially, with Michaela, my daughter, like that
mm.
part, there's so much shame, of being a mother and all these things. And I couldn't really access it. I couldn't really go there until I used psychedelics.
Yeah, so it's almost like, yeah, the shame was blocking the other
Yeah.
modalities, but that what psychedelics offered was a way to bypass that, to be able to then get to the root
Yeah.
cause.
To be in your heart, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned a few psychedelics. Can you tell us a bit more about what you've used and what helped the most on the unfolding journey? Or
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've used a lot. Acid I've had really incredible clarifying experiences with. But this is another like low and slow. Like I've learned that I'm very sensitive to acid. So one, drop of acid is going to be a much bigger, larger journey for me. Like honestly, a little micro drop is better for me because I can really get in there. But it's very clarifying. I feel like if I'm working a problem or there's something where I'm like, I just feel stuck and I can't figure out why, a mini acid trip will just help me really get through and clear it. It's like suddenly the noise goes away and my brain feels very clear and not foggy. So that's been in my arsenal. Ketamine has been probably for me, and there's probably some bias here too because it's what I started with, when I came to this. Ketamine I've done incredible work with. I've done incredible work with low dose ketamine, oral ketamine, and I've also done incredible work with IM ketamine. And I think because it's so dissociative, my body actually feels very natural in a dissociative space. I've dissociated a lot in my life. And so the trip itself doesn't feel as overwhelming. And then I have found just ketamine and IFS have been incredible. I've been able to do parts work that I frankly couldn't do in somatic therapy. We would get to pieces of it, but the part would never fully show itself. I am finding also as I do more of that parts work, or I've done more of that parts work in regular therapy, I'm actually able to access those parts easier. So it's almost like open to channel and a dialogue. MDMA I love, but for me, it's almost too big.
yeah,
It's so opening and so big that it's one that I would do like maybe once a year, if at all, and it just it can be very taxing, on the brain, the body. I've needed to really, use that one less frequently. Again, I had that beautiful journey in 2022. It was incredible. I was so grateful. And then I quickly realized, like, I don't think this is going to be the medicine for me to go in, to keep going in deeper. And then what else? Mushrooms, I've done psilocybin, which plant medicine for my nervous system. And this is something like I'm learning. This is, I think, the humbling part of working with psychedelics. Everyone's nervous system is different, right? Everybody is going to have a different response. And so plant medicine for me can sometimes be too big. So that's when I've really had to do like low and slow. Like I actually don't do great on a psilocybin microdosing protocol. It's too big. There's too much in it for me. I do better if I'm going to microdose on like a little LSD. Like that's a better for my brain. So again, I've had to like kind of like play and learn and fall on my face a few times.
Yeah.
But I think this is where trauma survivors, if they talk, you start to realize they're putting the pieces together. Like I have a dear friend that's a trauma survivor, and I was like, yeah, I'm at this really interesting place with plant medicine right now. What are your thoughts? And she's like, oh, I can't do mushrooms. It's too shocking on my nervous system.
Interesting. Really. And have you been exploring combining it with other trauma modalities like EMDR, at different phases of the protocol?
Yes.
You mentioned IFS, but are you bringing that in as well?
Definitely IFS. I've never done EMDR on psychedelics. I think that could definitely be interesting. I do, a lot of my own practices. I do a lot of breath work. I actually just did a micro of LSD, like a very small dose. And then I did some breath work in my sauna, and that was incredible.
Wow.
Like the combination of the breathing and the sweating, again, very low dose though, because that, you don't want to like blow your system out. Very, very low dose, but that was really, actually, it felt like it really got into some cracks and opened some things. And then on, the back end, I was able to like get in the water and kind of move my body and have like that's like combining those somatic practices to just, make sure that I'm moving things again with a sitter. Like you do all this like very, very responsibly. But I think having those somatic practices with a little bit of the expansiveness of the psychedelic is really incredible.
Yeah.
For me, it's always, how can I get my brain and body kind of in sync? Where my body's like, okay, we're safe. And my brain is like, we're safe. And I'm not in this dysregulated space. obviously, or not obviously, but extending my window of tolerance, essentially.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like the facilitators you're working with or you've worked with, awareness and sensitivity, like how aware do you think the psychedelic community is to the specific needs of sexual trauma survivors?
If I'm being honest, I don't think very at all. I think it's as a collective, I don't think we're having conversations we need to have. And I've seen a lot of incredible leaders in the space pushing just recently, with all the FDA stuff. I really saw someone in the space saying, we need to talk about the fact that harm can and will happen. Like acting like it's not going to happen is insane. It will and it can happen. What are we going to do about it? What are the protocols? I think the underground work is so, so important and so needed. But there's also a part where you don't have the licensing component. So what's the reporting structure? If something does happen. I think that we have a lot of conversations also to have with what does the training look like for the facilitator or the practitioner? And what type of individual work has that person done on themselves before they go sit for a survivor? Because you may be in a journey and the survivor may want a hug, or the survivor may, have touching. But if that wasn't agreed, if there was no, very, I think, hand, touching or on the shoulder, but very appropriate touch, you can see where people can blend boundaries and maybe they think they're helping, but at the end, it could be causing a ton of harm, And unfortunately, also there are assaults happening as well. There's again, I got away from that channel, right? I got out, but it gave me this humility and really understanding, this is how people get brainwashed. This is how they believe that this person, this healer, they were like, oh yeah, take all my money, or sure, I'll come live with you. You know what I mean? It's so easy to be coerced into life choices you wouldn't be making if you weren't in these expansive states or you weren't that vulnerable. And I would love to see, and it's something I'm actually playing around with, what would it look like if we had trainings for people working with survivors that were really built from the survivor's perspective and explaining, these are experiences we have, this is what the healing needs to look like, and really making that more mandatory,
Yeah, and almost the assumption that may exist in anyone. That see everyone potentially through that lens, because we don't know what's going to come up.
Exactly. And that's the thing with psychedelics. So much trauma. And I'm sure you've seen this so much trauma can come through. I'm not a unique case that I've had big T traumas come through in a journey, right? That's very normal. And the holding on that, during and after are so important. And I think, just like you said, seeing everybody through a trauma lens, we all have trauma. How do we have more trauma-informed practices and trainings?
And currently, what resources and support networks are there for survivors?
Yeah, so Ma'at is doing incredible work. I don't have their website on me right now, but they're doing amazing work that's survivor-centered. And I think they do actually have a training. Lauren Taus is doing amazing trainings. I went to her training in Topanga in March, and it's very trauma-focused. It's a lot. It's really a beautiful training. And then Melissa Whippo, Sunny Strasberg, and Lauren actually had an advanced training that I think having women at the helm makes a really big difference. MAPS obviously has their training, but I think it's gotten so big, that I would vet, where you're going through and all of that. But I think that's a big conversation happening right now. Is there a standardized training, or is there something that we can really be looking to? And this is where the psychedelic ecosystem feels like the Wild West. It feels like everybody's running a training. Everybody's like, let me teach you. But what does that actually, at the end look like?
Yeah. And in your opinion, what are some of the safeguards? How can we protect?
Yeah. Are those conversations happening? Is there a whole breakout session of, you're going to have trauma most likely come up. This is how you handle it. This is, are we having the conversations again? How much work are you doing as a practitioner on yourself? Because it can be alarming also, secondary trauma is real. You can have that experience of seeing someone go through something really hard and then it triggers something within the practitioner or guide. So what does that look like? I really believe in community and mental health. And so I think having these types of community conversations, having spaces to almost crowdsource, different tools, different resources, and then really distilling down vetted trainings that are doing this well is my dream, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe now is a good time to talk about the I Am Phoenix. Tell us
Yes.
about your work and your amazing venture. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So I started the Phoenix Project in 2018, really on the heels of Me Too. And originally it was for survivors by survivors. And it started as a community effort. It was community of survivors coming together and talking about what they were doing for healing. It's just basically that simple. And there was always, some speaking in the room, some sitting back. But at the end of all these events, someone would always come up to me and say, I'm so grateful I was just in the room. I heard something I needed that's going to help me. And now I'm moving my journey forward. And so at the same time, I was in my doctorate. And so I'm, very researcher brain at this point. And I'm thinking, well, that's happening every time in these physical spaces. Like, what could that translate to a digital space, where someone maybe reads something on a forum or is in an integration circle and again, like has this transcendent moment of, oh, I could use that in my toolkit, telling the stories. So I started an online platform for Phoenix in 2020. We launched at the start of COVID, which was
Perfect
absolutely
timing.
insane. Which was absolutely insane. Like, oh, here, got trauma, come on in. And it was basically the lesson was we scaled so fast and so quickly, and I just didn't have the support. So I was raising my daughter, doing my dissertation, and running this startup. And it was beautiful. It was a vibrant community. We had access to all these different healing modalities. So sound baths and yoga and somatic work and Face Gym out of New York did like a face therapy. It was just amazing, right? We had all these things. It was all digital, right? Like what a perfect time that everyone's locked down and doing this. And then I kept seeing this theme where I could see people almost like getting stuck, right? Because they're either just really dysregulated and coming online, and then that's triggering other members of the community, or they're just not able to like move it the next step forward. And so I got curious and thought like, well, what could we do with technology that could help people heal even faster? And tried some different ideas, thought, okay, maybe this thing is just too hard to build, put it on the side, and then kept having the gnawing of like, oh, I still feel like there's something we could be doing here. And I basically have been playing with AI, and I'm positioned right now to build something in the AI space that I think could help someone resource quicker if they're having, a dysregulated experience or they have questions as a trauma survivor, they're seeking answers. And I'm just starting to play with this, but I'm coming back to really the roots of Phoenix. Like when I really think about what I'm doing, well, yeah, I see a technology solution. The answer is story. We need to be telling the stories. We need to be sharing those. And so I'm also growing a little bit of a research project in the psychedelic space where we're centering women's stories because we want to say, tell us how you're healing. What does that look like? What resources do you use? What's your, like if you're comfortable, what's your dosing protocol? Like, how are you doing your own healing? And then really collecting those stories and putting those together as some qualitative research.
Amazing. And what are you finding? I mean, what's come out of it so
just
far?
started it. Just started it. Haven't officially like really put it out into the world. But just in like preliminary conversations, community is a huge component of healing. Women journeying together. So
Yeah.
women doing, medicine work together, women sitting together, where it really is all women and going into those medicine spaces together. I'm seeing massive, and I'm hearing about massive feminine healing that's happening. Also, just having a little bit of play and joy in there. So like, not having to always be in the heavy trenches of the hard trauma healing, actually letting the healing happen. So there's more access to joy. And for trauma survivors, I keep hearing, again, these are preliminary conversations, but that's harder than working the trauma. Actually feeling joy and trusting that that's safe tends to be harder and more dysregulating. I'm so curious, I'm so curious where this goes. And then at the end of the day, I'm a researcher and a speaker. So I'm like, let's write about it. Let's talk about it. Let's really bring this into the conversation because I believe stories hold so much medicine for all of us.
Yeah, are there any short stories you can share with us? Any examples or anecdotes that
I can tell a story. So I went to this training in Topanga, and it was a ketamine training with Lauren Taus and her team. we did two separate journeys. So the first group was 7 men and I think 2 women. And then the second group was 7 women and 2 men. So I was in the room or the group primarily with the women, but 4 of the women in there, or 3 of the women, I'm sorry, were all my housemates. We shared this little place called The Nest. And so we really, through this whole training, you know, we were eating together, we were sleeping under the same roof, we're doing our saunas together, we're talking, like we had this beautiful, beautiful, like flourishing, you know, little community built in. And so when we went to journey, we all lined up, you know, to go do our IM journey. And all the women had this transcendent connective moment in the journey where you could like feel. So the sitter said it was like you could watch feminine energy just like come in, and it was like wild and moving. But there was a moment where apparently 3 of us started singing at the same time and all started singing the same song. Like just
Wow.
totally like all singing the same song, like in different parts of the room, just like found each other, you know, in the liminal space and started singing.
What were you singing?
I have no idea. I just, everyone said there was this moment where like 3 of us just sunk up and started singing together. And people were like, whoa, like incredible. One of the women next to me, she had this beautiful journey where she was the Virgin Mary and like light was flying out everywhere. There was just all this beautiful, beautiful feminine energy. And for me in that journey, I was really, it felt like in like the womb space, like I was going down and down and down, and I kept twisting and things were getting tighter and I kept trying to like fit. And then I got to the bottom, which was like this just black, heavy ground. And I had like, it felt like a tribunal almost was around me, but I couldn't see them. And I'm in the middle and I realized the only way I'm going to go through is if I break through the bottom. And so in the journey, I said, I'm so angry. I'm angry. And I took my hand and I slapped it and the whole bottom shattered. And then I'm just sitting there with the divine mother, like with great mother, like the energy of the divine feminine. It's all black and I could feel all of her energy. And I was just suspended in this space with her. And I just started crying. You know, it was so beautiful. And it was so clarifying that, you know, we all come from love. We all come from this consciousness of just pure essence of love. And that's what we are. And that's where, you know, it's so like, she was showing me my trauma really rapidly. She was like throwing it all at me. And I was like watching it really quickly. And then I had a moment where I said to her, I understand now. Thank you. And I had this beautiful moment of being grateful for all the trauma and all the lessons that it taught me, you know? And then I just sat there with her and asked her, what do you want me to do? And she said, use me in everything that you do. And then that was the rest of my trip. I just was like in this beautiful suspended space of the divine mother. And so when we all came back, I was looking at the different, you know, faces in the room, and the women, a lot, you know, some of them were like, you know, it was big trips, but some of us also just huge smiles. And when we did the integration component where we were sharing, there were these key themes of the divine mother. There were these key themes of love, of the divine feminine. You know, there was this beautiful piece of connection. One woman had said I was dancing in her journey and singing. So I don't know if that's someone that, you know what I mean? Like the singing component. And then the sitters reported out and said, like, 3 of you started singing together. Like a bunch of you were moving at the same time. A bunch of you were doing breath work together. Like it was just so magical, you know, but that's the power of doing medicine work in community, and community that's safe, right? Like that's
Absolutely.
help.
Absolutely.
You can go so deep.
Yeah. Oh, it was so beautiful, that story. I had goosebumps as you were describing it. It just reminded me of, you know, what woman was thousands of years ago, dancing together with a framed drum. You know, I was reading about the cult of Dionysus, you know, and just coming together in worship and experiencing these expanded states, healing together.
Completely. Healing with each other. And it feels, I'm so, you know, I love medicine work for all, but I'm so fascinated with medicine work for women and the power that it holds, you know. And when you journey together in community and you go back to those more ritualistic, those parts, just incredible. I was listening to Women Rise Rooted recently, and it's just the same thing, going back to the lore and the wisdom that women hold, and how we've lost touch of that, you know, going back to those things. And again, it's at the heart of it, it's story. There's so much beautiful medicine in the stories. And I'd love to see people share more of their stories. That's why
Mm.
Phoenix is having this story component, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
because I think it's really needed, especially in mental health. It's we heal in relations, you know, we heal in connection with one another, and we're hardwired for the connection. So when you see someone else kind of saying, okay, I went this path, or this is what worked for me, or this is what didn't, or, you know, you start to have those curiosities come online and talk
Mm.
about it.
And being witnessed in our story, you know, having
Oh,
others
be
witness.
witnessed. So important.
Mm.
So important. Again, if you can take shame out of the conversation, I don't feel like the trauma can keep growing, you know?
Mm. You bring it into the light.
Exactly.
Well, what do you envision for Phoenix in the future? You know, what does it
Oh,
look
that's a
like?
great question. And I'm kind of like sitting in the question right now, if I'm being honest, right? Like I went from a very structured startup with a, you know, plan to raise venture capital and be very typical like Silicon Valley startup, but it's frankly a culture that's really hard. And I don't want to commodify healing at the end of the day. I don't want that to be what we do. So I'm playing with the AI piece. I'm getting curious. I'm looking at it as potential, you know, solution. I think there's beautiful space for AI to do amazing work as an optimizer, but not the answer for all, right? So there's some curiosity there. And if it feels like we can do that with some guardrails and we can do that in a healthy way, I'd love to see that solution in the world. And I'm really focused on impact. You know, how do we get people access to high quality healing that
Mm.
historically just wouldn't have it? Even again, just bringing the stories and the conversation and the tools to somebody,
Yeah.
because I believe we all have our own inner healing intelligence. So how do we wake that up in somebody? How do we nurture that? And while doing that, keeping the qualitative component alive and saying we need more stories, we need more talking about this. So maybe it becomes a podcast. Maybe it, you know,
Mm.
like maybe there's a component where we have the conversations, you know, where it becomes a journal, right? Where we're doing the qualitative data in alignment. So like
Mm.
for the first time, I'm giving myself a summer to just play. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna just get in there and enjoy. I'm also in a psychedelic design course through that's adjacent to the Stanford Design School that a friend gifted me. And that has been so fun. Like it's opened my brain to like playing and getting curious. And again, I'm just like really like, all right, I trust that I will know where I want to take this, but I am giving myself room to be in the lab, so to speak.
Yeah, to play and to really give yourself the space to
Yes.
allow the ideas, allow it all to grow naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, where innovation comes, right? When we're not in that very like type A, like I have to figure out how to monetize this, or I have to figure out how to fundraise for this, or, you know, I have to scale this. Instead, saying, you know, I want to have impact in the most loving way. What does that look like? What do I build? And I think those value-based questions guide a different solution.
Absolutely. And when we kind of connect to our dharma, then it comes, right?
Exactly. Exactly. It's like this is the, you know, sometimes like you have to laugh at the simplicity of human life, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is it. I'm here to do some lessons, do some work it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it will
Okay.
come. It will all
It'll
figure
come.
we don't need to control it too much. It will all fall into
Exactly.
place.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm excited to kind of see where it leads and where it goes. And I'm horrible at social media. I wish I was better. So people are like, can I follow you? And I'm like, sure, I don't post ever. But you know, if you go on our website, iamphoenixproject.com, you can sign up for a newsletter, and I think I'll start to get that and going, and just start to sharing a little more of the journey, you know, what we're working on, what we're building. I have colleagues that want to add a survey component also, because some people might not want to tell a story and do the qualitative side, but I think a survey is still really interesting data collection of, again, the very simple question, how are you healing? What does that look like in this world today?
And are there any specific populations or demographics that you're focusing on?
So for me, women, I really want to focus on women's mental health in the psychedelic space. So centering the experience of women and making that the focal point.
And in what ways do you prioritize cultural sensitivity and inclusivity?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a huge piece. I think representation and healing is so important. And so having this, like myself leading as a white woman, you know, I'm not going to claim to know all of the things at all. So my training is in participatory action research. And so you actually build the research with those that are living the experience. And that's really what I want built into all of this. And then also having, you know, different advisors, and we're trying to build the most accessible, but also like looking at all the blind spots that we can have, right? And I know we're not going to do it perfect. I know there's going to be pieces that we are going to learn in, but this is where I get excited about the technology. You can make access to things available for anybody in ways that are way less expensive than, other modalities. And so I'm curious to see if that kind of disrupts a little bit and gives this accessibility piece that we've never really seen.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, what advice would you give any organizations, maybe this side of the pond, that are wanting to set something similar up?
Oh gosh, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But I think, coming to the work from a values-based place, doing the best you can to have your ego taken out of it, is true leadership. And not needing to be the smartest person in the room, putting smart people around you, so people that are DEI trained, or people that are, best in the field, or whatever the component is, right? So again, removing the ego and saying, I have this vision, but how do I do it the best I can? I think, partnering, I have a lot to say about, like, if you're going to work with academia, I think that can sometimes like be harder at times. So, but there's also a role, of those systems and those structures. And I'm trying to think if I know anybody over there doing qualitative research like this. I don't think I do off the top of my head. I'm sure there's somebody. I'm sure like there's some institute or there's somebody starting to do this. And, working in collaboration, I think is also really, really powerful.
Yeah.
But it can be a lot of like ego dissolution work, like when you're in a collaboration situation, like you might be like, I didn't want to do it that way. And I love, the more social justice modalities of research. So participatory action research, ethnography, again, like centering the lived experience and building from that way out, rather than you're the researcher and you're coming in looking down and saying that, this is how I'm designing this. What I love about participatory action research is like every component of the design research structure is done in relation to those living the experience. You don't even put survey questions together or research questions together until you've really vetted that with those that are kind of like your tribunal and grounding and giving you feedback to say, that's not the way I'd ask that question, or that actually cuts off this population if we ask that, So it's I think getting curious about other qualitative modalities that historically don't get as much love.
Yeah, as much airtime. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So moving forward, Melissa, what do you hope to see in terms of progress and change within the psychedelic ecosystem to better support sexual trauma survivors?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honest conversation about what's going on. We know when things are happening, we maybe a news story comes out or and the news cycle is ridiculous, right? It's so satiated. It's like this happened and then it's done. Where's the follow through on, okay, there's shadow here and there's shadow in the human experience. This isn't new. What do we do about it? How are we making survivors safer? How are we addressing the shadow side in our communities even? How are we using restorative justice to, when there's rupture, have repair? What does that look like? And I think these are really hard conversations. I don't think it's a one size fits all solution at all, but some sort of collective modeling, some sort of framework, I think would be really powerful. And again, I feel like the psychedelic ecosystem is the Wild West. So I tell everybody, it's like, now just go build your table. Like if you don't see the table you want to sit at, go build it. This is an incredible time to innovate and start to put these things in place. I myself am working more with survivors and saying, let's actually make this thing a body of work. This is important research. Let's get that out there. Let's be talking about it. Let's be speaking about it. And that type of modeling, I think, is needed right now. And then again, like having the collaboration component, who is doing it well, if at all, and ask if you can be part of the conversation with them. And I think there's so much space for collaboration and there's so much siloing in psychedelics. And I'd love to see more of a community approach to all
Absolutely.
of this.
Kind of collaboration coming together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, like it's going to take time. It's not like you're going to wake up one day and be like, oh, we just fixed it all, right? It's like an ongoing conversation. And so normalizing that with one another, let's be curious. So going back to IFS, right? How do we put some self energy in this? How do we come with curiosity, compassion? How do we really meet these bigger questions with an open mind? And I'd love to see that just continuing to foster and grow. And so anytime I'm on a stage, anytime I'm on a podcast, I'm like, it's community first. Let's build it. Let's be doing it. And let's get curious about the darker side of psychedelics. You know, let's stop acting like it's not in the room, because it absolutely is.
And something that came up for me then again was the slow and steady. You know, just doing it
slow and
steady, slow and steady,
slow and steady.
Wow.
Exactly. Like there's no reason to just bolt in, you know, head down and be like, we're changing everything. Like little incremental shifts, you know. And then I think having conversations about leadership, right? Like a leader, not in a hierarchical stance, but in more of a collective community stance. And I believe, you know, a good leader just creates more leaders around them. And it becomes this more charged, you know, organic piece comes alive, and we can trust, especially for trauma survivors. I think anytime you can trust your inner healer, your inner healing intelligence, that's so powerful and so transcendent. So
absolutely. And that's what we want people to learn, right? To trust their inner healing potential.
Even when it looks crazy. I've had journeys where I'm like, what was that? What was it? You know, but on the integration side, I'm like, oh, okay, all right, I get it, you know?
Yeah, makes sense now.
Makes sense now, exactly.
So as we start to wrap up, Melissa, what advice would you give to sexual trauma survivors who are considering exploring psychedelics, you know, as part of their healing journey?
Just be really, really soft and gentle with yourself. You know, your ego may want to come in and really, I mean, I get it if you want to have a macro journey, but do that safely, you know, have a very vetted guide, have that support. Even micro journeys, you know, have a really good sitter or guide that you can trust. Have clarifying conversations in the prep. You know, what is safe touch for you? What are your boundaries? And frankly, again, safe touch should be something as simple as like a hand on a shoulder or a hand on the hand. Like it shouldn't be, you know, hugging and all these other things, right? It needs to be really, there needs to be a lot of respect there, and really doing a lot of prep work before you go into the journey. You know, asking yourself some deeper questions, asking what is it, you know, why am I doing this? What's the intention of this? Why am I wanting to go into this space? And being curious about what shows up, you know, and then really working with those protector parts. So important for a trauma survivor. And it's not as sexy and fun, you know, to say, go work with your protector parts, because that can take a long time. But I think it's a really good investment in the work. And I think it can really be valuable to a trauma survivor if you can get your protectors in alignment with you, to trust you. That goes to that part of trusting your inner healing intelligence. And I think it's incredibly powerful. I love a low and slow protocol, but I don't think that might not be for everybody. So, you know, getting curious about what medicines work for you, why, learning kind of their edges. And then again, taking the ego out of it. All medicines might not work for people. Yeah. One medicine might work. And you may feel some shame. You know, you may see people being like, oh, well, you know, that didn't work for me. Or that, like, be really clear with yourself about what your needs are and what works. And then it's super important to integrate on the back end. You know, don't stack your journeys. Just really have a lot of spaciousness, especially as you're working trauma. The integration piece is so, so important. So I love somatic work for integration. I love community work for my integration. I love nature. I think she's the most beautiful ally to integrate with. So getting curious about what helps you integrate your journeys on the back end.
Yeah, amazing.
And space, you know, give yourself space, give yourself permission. Trauma survivors, we are so used to just surviving. Space is such a beautiful gift to give yourselves. So much can come up in that.
And finally, like, what wisdom would you offer survivors of sexual trauma and their partners?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Yes, my partner, actually, we got back together. After 4 months, we found our way back to each other, and it's been so deeply healing and wonderful. You know, to love a survivor is I think just, it's so beautiful and it's so healing. But for the partner, you know, have patience, learn about PTSD and CPTSD, learn about trauma, start to understand if your partner is dysregulated. Don't personalize it. You know, my partner and I have really been working through this when I'm in dysregulated spaces, especially when those protector parts come along. You know, put support around you and around the relationship. And then both of you, you know, really, I believe like you can do such deep, beautiful healing in relationship. And to trust that and to feel safe in that is like just absolutely priceless. So again, giving it space, right? Like low and slow. How do you build those practices? How do you have that toolkit? How do you normalize some conversations of, okay, she's dysregulated. I'm gonna, you know, what my partner actually does is he's like, I'm gonna take a 10 out. We'll come back together in an hour. So for me, the abandoned piece isn't activated. I know we're going to come back together in an hour, and I'm able to take that space to kind of get myself back to a regulated space. Or if we check in the hour and I'm still dysregulated, it's like, okay, we're going to take some more time. So having that space and that permission, I think is so important. And then wisdom for trauma survivors, just healing, I believe, is the bravest work you will ever do. And my hope and prayer for every trauma survivor is I want you to find your joy. I want you to be in your joy. And I want that to become this like beautiful new journey for you where joy is safe and you can experience it.
Oh, Melissa, thank you so much. It has been so wonderful to talk to you, and I so appreciate your time and your wisdom. And it's just been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye. Have a nice day.
You've been listening to the Psychedelic Couch. For more episodes, please follow me on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts, and find me on Instagram at the Psychedelic Couch and at Claire Faulkner Therapy, where I will be keeping you up to date on the latest episodes and information surrounding all things therapy, psychedelics, and expanded states.